I'm Wayne Brow, Chief Economist at Freedom Works. In today's lesson, I want to talk about competition and monopoly, both important concepts for economists. We've seen how markets are very good at allocating resources. Competition forces businesses to provide what consumers want at the best price. If a firm charges too much for its goods and services, others will enter the market and sell at a lower rate. The constant threat of competition keeps prices low and consumers happy. But what if a firm has no competitors? This is what economists call a monopoly, or sole provider. In this case, there is no threat of competition to keep prices low, and the monopolist may restrict output and raise prices. This can be bad for consumers and the economy as a whole. Consumers transfer more of their income to producers, and the economy suffers because as output is restricted, there are willing buyers and willing sellers whose transactions cannot take place. In a competitive market, economists say that firms are price takers. What this means is that no single firm can set the market price. The threat of competition is real, and if a firm charges prices that are too high, it loses customers. So it makes no sense to charge higher than market prices because there are no willing customers above that price. There is always downward pressure on prices as producers compete and new technologies allow cheaper methods of production. But for the monopolist, there is no threat of competition, so we don't call the monopolist a price taker. Economists refer to monopolists as price searchers, because the monopolist has the ability to find the price that maximizes the firm's revenue. When we have monopolies, therefore, consumers don't see the benefit of competition and may end up paying higher prices. As a result, economists and government policymakers pay close attention to monopolies, claiming they're the result of market failures that reduce consumer welfare. In the United States, antitrust laws were passed in order to break up monopolies in the name of consumer protection. These laws date back to the Progressive era when lawmakers sought to redesign markets and dismantle large corporations such as Standard Oil. The so-called trustbusters believed they could redesign the market in order to eliminate monopolies and foster competition. But it's not clear the antitrust laws have been effective in promoting competition. To understand why, we need to take a closer look at the concept of monopoly. In the marketplace, free from any artificial barriers, there is little evidence of long-standing monopolies. The last big antitrust case that anyone remembers is probably Department of Justice taking on Microsoft over Internet Explorer. At the time, federal policymakers viewed the bundling of Internet Explorer with Microsoft's desktop software as anti-competitive, because this gave Internet Explorer an advantage over other browsers. But look at the market today. The threat from Internet Explorer seems to have been overblown, as other search engines have surpassed it, and Google and Apple have become the dominant players in today's market. So we have to be careful about how we talk about monopoly, because the existence of monopoly often depends on how you define the market. For example, does Coke compete with Pepsi, or does Coke compete with all soft drinks? What about fruit juices, bottled water, coffee, tea? You can see that how we define the market for Coke also defines its market share. If we're talking simply about cola-flavored beverages, then Coke and Pepsi have the lion's share of the market. But we're talking about beverages in general, Coke's market share is dramatically reduced. Antitrust lawyers and federal regulators are constantly arguing over what constitutes the market in order to determine whether a company is a monopolist. If you can define the market narrowly enough, you can create a monopolist. But here's where you have to be careful, because in the marketplace, monopolies come and go, and they don't necessarily harm consumers over the long run. A monopoly may emerge because a company is first to develop a new product that consumers desire. But in an open marketplace, the profits earned by this monopolist attracts other producers, and prices are eventually bid back down to competitive levels. In this sense, monopolies are ambiguous and fleeting, and there are powerful forces that keep monopolists in check. The first is the availability of alternatives. If consumers can find alternative solutions to satisfy their demands, they will abandon the monopolist's products, much the way FedEx, UPS, and email allow consumers to escape the U.S. Postal Service's monopoly. So you can see that the topic of monopolies is a bit complicated. Most exist due to artificial barriers created by the government. Monopolies in the marketplace tend to dissipate over time as consumers and producers find new and cheaper alternatives. Economists view open and competitive markets as the most effective means of allocating resources. More often than not, the best policy is identifying and eliminating artificial impediments to competition that have been created by the government for the benefit of politically favored monopolists.